This is Wendy Volhard, the visionary behind Volhard Dog Nutrition. Her remarkable journey began with a profound and intuitive bond to animals, a bond she didn't realize was unique until others noticed.
It never occurred to me that I didn't have a connection, and I always talked to my animals. So I always had a connection. I don't know when I became aware that the fact that I had a connection, but I always did. So, and I can go into somebody's house and sit there very quietly, not move a muscle, and they always come to me. So I think when you're working with animals, as you well know with all yours, is that you have to be honest with them, emotionally honest and physically honest. I think they're attracted to that kind of energy.
Wendy's seminars gathered like minded souls, experts whose knowledge planted seeds for what would become a groundbreaking approach to canine health. Here, she crossed paths with Jerry Brunetti and Robert, pivotal figures who inspired her to transform her vision into reality. Encouraged by Robert's belief, Wendy embraced the challenge. What began as a passion quickly flourished into a thriving business.
Really, in retrospect, I think it happened because I used to put on healthy dog seminars years and years ago, and I always had speakers to come. And one guy we had come was called Jerry Brunetti, and he had a soil and food company. He was an absolute expert on soils, and he did custom nutritional diets for large animals. His friend was Robert. There was somebody in the audience who owned another dog food company who said to me, "You really should get to meet this Robert." I had met Jerry, was very impressed with him. And that person who owned that dog food company wanted my formula because I had worked out a formula for dog food. And he wanted to incorporate it. But in any event, it went forward from there, and we developed new products, endurance being one of them. So that's how the idea started. I will always work with somebody else, mainly because I thought I couldn't do it myself, because I was involved in nutrition and dogs and breeding and all of those things and helping other people. And I never thought that I would have the financial wherewithal to start a company. Robert said to me, ultimately, when he was retired, I worked with him for years. And when he started to think about retiring, he said, "You need to do this and you can do this." So that was the start of it all.
Q Lisa and Brian Berg, two passionate dog owners who retired from the police force to begin a nonprofit for veterans, as well as a successful training facility. They shared the same passion for canine nutrition and education.
I was a victim of my own success, and it got too big for me, and I couldn't, as a single person, do it. It was just absolutely not possible. So for, I would say, at least 2 years, looking around for somebody to take it over. But that required, again, somebody knowledgeable with dogs and nutrition, and who also could run a successful business. Lisa started coming to the Healthy Dog conferences, and we got friendly. And as time went on, I offered it to them, and they took it over, and they've been phenomenal ever since. They've really done a wonderful job, both of them.
Despite industry pushback against natural feeding, Wendy stayed true to her roots, drawing upon her childhood experiences in post war England, where dog biscuits were the norm and homemade food ensured longevity. Growing up surrounded by natural, nutrient rich food deeply influenced Wendy's philosophy. This foundational knowledge shaped her relentless pursuit to understand why her methods worked so effectively.
Industry itself, of course, is very much against any kind of raw feeding and all the scare tactics and people saying you're going to kill your dog, and you just simply can't do that. But growing up in England after World War II, there was no such thing as dog food. There was Spratz dog biscuits. That's all there was. And we always made our own food for our dogs when I was growing up. And they lived very long lives. So it didn't resonate with me, and made me, I think, I rise to a challenge. So when somebody said, "You can't do this," I decided, yes, I can. When I started, I just developed a recipe. And it was pretty involved and difficult to get the ingredients. But anyway, I did that for a number of years. And that was going back to that other dog food company wanted to buy that recipe. And I never let it out of my hand. I always kept control of the recipe. But that was when AM and PM was born, because that was the closest thing to what I was doing, making the food. But the industry itself was just, it was basically a waste industry. You know, big conglomerates would have products left over and nothing goes to waste, as you know, in this country. So they just redirected it to dog food. So the ingredients were good. And they have to do it because, you know, they have to earn money like everybody else. So, yeah, it's a very difficult profession. The holistic vets out there are just amazing that they continue, really. Getting more and more in each area. Let's hope for the future. You know, my joy was working with the animals. Building Volhard was a totally different kettle of fish. Everybody lies. Everybody you go to in the industry lies. And the lack of honesty, I suppose, was the hardest lesson. You know, people say, oh, no, our food contains this, it contains that. And then you turn around and you find it was just not true. So that and sourcing the proper ingredients. Working with Robert, Extra Factors. Extra Factors is a very, very large corporation worldwide. They had access and they make customized animal feeds and so on. Robert was a graduate from University of Pennsylvania, I think. And he graduated with, I think, 13 classmates, and they formed this company. And each of them had a different area of expertise: hogs in Texas, cows in stockyards somewhere. And they would formulate diets for the circumstances in which that animal found itself. So the stress levels, of course, were just huge. So Robert had small animals, and that's how he helped me. Yeah, and it was just so refreshing meeting him. And he was just a wonderful guy. And he helped me and encouraged me to do this. And we figured it out over a period of time. So it was a long period of time.
Driven by curiosity, Wendy immersed herself in holistic studies, from early teachings with Dr. Cousins, a pioneering veterinarian, to the profound insights of traditional Chinese medicine. Her dedication equipped her to unravel complex health mysteries in animals.
My father had a back problem, and that kept him out of World War II. And to get himself better, he finally found a dietitian that he followed, was a man called Dr. Hayes. And the Hayes diet was quite a famous diet. And he followed that and improved his health enormously. So growing up, I had, you know, good foods, not necessarily very tasty things like molasses and water. I had to drink every day. So it's for all the minerals now. But, you know, in those days, there was no breakdown of what was in food. There was no scientific studies done on what's in food. You know, this is good for you, or that's good for you. So anyway, yeah, but it all came from that. It's all around me all of the time. Yes. Obviously, it had to be local grown because there wasn't much importation at that time. Couldn't use things like oranges and lemons because they didn't grow in England. It seemed that everything else of all processed foods seemed to be so contrary to how I grew up. It was just contrary to my, I suppose, belief system at that time. So when I was young, when I started all of this, but the animals I had always did well. And in comparison to other people's animals, they rarely got sick. So as time went on, it becomes obvious, oh, this must be what I'm doing, you know, is making a difference. But the other thing is that I am absolutely in love with learning. So whilst this was going on, why does this work? I'm besieged by the question of why. So I had learned, first of all, I met a veterinarian who was, his name was Dr. Kearns, and he was one of the very, very first holistic vets in this country. He was in Boston. And I studied with him for 4 years. So driving back and forth, I was living north of Syracuse at the time, driving back and forth with him, piling me up with books. And one of the most telling things he said to me, I was driving down, I had a little motorhome, and driving down the driveway, one day he ran up to me and he said, I want you to think of this on the 6-hour drive back. Suppose everything that you've learned so far is wrong. Just think about that, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. So that was, to this day, remember, that made me question every single thing that I did. Why did I do what I did? And still today, it stays with me. I just wanted to learn. So I learned from him, I learned homeopathy. That was the very first thing that I learned. And then Chinese medicine. And it just goes on, everything had to be learned.
Wendy's integrative diagnostic approach became well known, blending intuition and rigorous study. Her holistic dog camps, lasting nearly 40 years, showcased her unparalleled ability to pinpoint ailments, often astonishing veterinarians with her accuracy.
The outcome of all of that was an ability to diagnose. So at the end of it all, um, was diagnostics, which was I absolutely loved. And that drew me more and more to helping more people because why did that happen to that dog? What's happened? And the questions you have to ask. Did you get vaccinated recently? What have you eaten? Where do you live, etc., etc. So it gave me the ability to help a lot of dogs. Though it was backed up by learning. So when we had these healthy dogs camps, which I ran for ever, almost 40 years, sometimes veterinarians would come and we'd have games. Dog would be presented, let's say a Rottweiler, and it wasn't feeling well. There was a veterinarian from Quebec who taught me acupuncture, and then there was a regular veterinarian and me, and we'd sit down and we'd say, okay, let's look at this dog. No information, nothing, no hands-on, no nothing, just and let's see what we can come up with. Interestingly, we came up with pretty much the same thing, but I came to it totally differently because I was using Chinese medicine and I was using Yin and all of these things. They were using how they had learned diagnostically. Yeah, it was interesting because there's, what is it, Mars has this taken over all these veterinary hospitals, and what is it, nearly 80% of them are owned by them. So the veterinarians are given 15 minutes to go over a dog, and sometimes that's nowhere near enough because you can't get enough information.
Wendy's compassion extended beyond dogs. Horses, too, sensed her unique empathy, drawing her into deeper connections and dramatic interventions, including the extraordinary tale of baby Emma. Through intuitive kinesiology, Wendy pinpointed a hormonal imbalance. Her precise intervention enabled a seemingly impossible pregnancy, bringing Emma into the world, a poignant lesson in humility and respect for nature. Wendy's approach embodies deep respect and humility. She always advocates fiercely for animals, understanding their unspoken desires and needs, ensuring their voices are heard and honored.
And a lot of back and forth and willingness to listen. You can't do that because of this. And then he'd come back and say, yes, you can do that if you do that. So, it was a lovely relationship. It really was. Helping animals was not restricted to dogs. And I had so many friends who had horses. I never had much knowledge of horses, but I had a friend who had horses, and every time I would walk up the road to her house and the horses in the field, they'd come and run at me and look at me, and I never knew why, actually. And then I'd say, do you feel well? And through kinesiology, you could get the answer, and often it was no. And then, of course, I was able to figure out what was wrong with them. But this one particular friend had a mare who was a very expensive mare, and she could not become pregnant. And so in despair, they were going to send her back and sell her, right? So she asked me as a last-ditch effort to come over and do some testing on this horse. So this was a beautiful animal, and her farm, because we live in Virginia with Blue Ridge Mountains, so it was on the edge, and so the fields very often went up high. And I looked up, I said to my friend that, okay, you stay in the tack room. I'm going to go climb over the fence, sit on the fence and see what this mare has to tell me. Climbed over the fence, sat down on the ground with my clipboard and all my questions. And this animal suddenly reared up and then raced down the hill. And I thought I was going to die. And she stopped with a screech in front of me and sort of paraded back and forth. And she knew I was talking to her. And so I went through my list of questions, what's wrong with you, et cetera, et cetera. And I got to the hormones part and asked if her hormones were normal, and no, they're not normal. So we figured out that she was lacking progesterone, necessary to become pregnant. So I climbed back over the fence, thanked her, and said, okay, and I went back into the tack room, and my friend, I said, I found it, it's progesterone. And she said, well, of course it's progesterone, I know that. I learned many years ago to ask the form over medicine because medicine comes in many different forms. And so I'd learned them from worming medicines, for example. And a dog can be allergic to a certain form. For example, if it's liquid and something's added to that liquid as well, they might be allergic to that, not the actual medicine itself. So we went through and we found out that she could tolerate progesterone cream made for humans, wild yam, and she needed, you can also test how much, and it was less than a fingernail, inside her left thigh every night. And I said to my friend, you don't want to go through all of this. This is a horse pregnancy. It goes on forever. Oh, I'll do it. She said, I'll do it. And bless her heart, she did that. Every night she went to put the horses to bed. She put this cream on the horses inside her left thigh and went on. She was pregnant. She managed to keep the pregnancy. And baby Emma was born. I was allowed to name her. So I named her. She was gorgeous, of course. Fish story. So I used to have a desk where I kept yellow stickums on the cases I was working on, and I'd test them every morning when I'd get up to see if everybody was okay. And when I'm testing, and she came up not okay. So I called Pauline and said, okay, something's gone on with this horse, and I've tracked it down to water, keeping your water buckets clean. And she said, I don't use water buckets. I have a trough in the field, which is pumped up from a stream. I can't work this out. I better come over. So I drove the 45 minutes to a farm there, chomped around. It was March with absolute mud that poops off. And we got into the middle of this field and looked down at this trough. And she gasped and said, oh my God, there's no fish. What in the hell would you want fish water trough? And she said they eat the bacteria. They keep the water clean. I had no idea. How many fish do I need? And we tested and she needed 9 fish. So she ran off to the pet store, local pet store, and got 9 goldfish and plopped them in. Anyway, so the pregnancy went on, the baby was born, foal was born, and I named her Emma, and she grew beautifully. And then when she got to about 10 months old, I went, no, Emma, what happened to Emma? Why is she dead? And apparently what I didn't know was that she was born from a mother who reared a lot, and the foal had reared and fallen over backwards and broken her back. That was just an awful story, and not too long afterwards, the mother did the same thing, and she also died. It was a really tragic story, but it gives me goosebumps because I was able to diagnose all of that, what was going on, and have a successful, what I thought successful. But it always a greatest lesson because sometimes you shouldn't interfere with Mother Nature. And just I had the ability to diagnose did not mean I had the right to do something. So what I learned from that was the first question I always ask, do you want to be healed for you to become pregnant? Because I'm interfering, I'm assuming I'm right? And there something's going on with them that I can fix. Well, maybe it shouldn't be fixed. So that was always a good question and thought, especially with old dogs. Sometimes old dogs want to die. They don't go through all these things and keep the dog alive. And should it be kept alive? I think you have to honor the animal's feelings. They have to be taken into account. In the kinesiology and all the questioning I did with them, and it was one of the first questions I asked before I went on. And it's a complicated formula to keep them alive. I never take no for an answer. When somebody says no, you know there's something behind it. Always just pursue what you feel is right, but just with that caveat of not taking over and being superior to an animal, taking into account what they want. And the other thing is that when in doubt, and God knows when you're learning all of this stuff, there's some doubt involved, always doubt involved, is that always come down on advocating for the animal. Because animals have been, dogs in particular, have been exploited by so many industries, the dog food industry, the veterinary industry, the drug industry, et cetera, so on the side of the dog or the animal. My family well, they're all in Scotland now, but they all think it's quite peculiar. But on the other hand, I think it keeps you young.
Wendy Volhard's story is one of unwavering dedication, profound insight, and boundless compassion, forever changing how we nourish and understand our beloved companions.